Chief Engineer Marcus Torres preferred the graveyard shift aboard the humanitarian vessel Starbridge. For the same reasons, he preferred fixing complex problems to attending administrative meetings. Fewer interruptions meant better focus, and critical repairs were easier to complete when politicians weren't trying to help with technical decisions they didn't understand. The ship hummed around him with the constant energy of systems that kept 3,000 refugees and medical personnel alive, while providing transportation and assistance along the contested border between human and Velnari space. The shuttle bay operated around the clock, with craft constantly arriving and departing to transport people and supplies between the neutral vessel and various aid stations throughout disputed territories. Another thrilling evening of preventing evacuation disasters through proper maintenance, Marcus muttered to himself as he reviewed the shift's work orders. Shuttle 7 showing power fluctuations in the quantum core. Shuttle 12 requiring complete navigation system recalibration, and what appeared to be systematic wear patterns in the evacuation pod deployment mechanisms that suggested someone was using the emergency systems more frequently than normal operational requirements would explain. The Velnari refugees aboard Starbridge looked almost human, except for the pointed ears and the luminous skin markings that shifted patterns based on emotional states. Marcus's engineering briefings described as culturally significant social communication, not requiring technical interpretation. But Marcus had noticed that certain marking patterns seemed to correlate with stress levels and health conditions that affected how passengers responded to shuttle travel and emergency procedures. His workspace in the main shuttle bay provided comprehensive access to all the craft that required maintenance, everything from basic personnel transports to specialized medical evacuation vessels that could operate in contested space, where technical failures could result in diplomatic incidents or passenger casualties. Shuttle 7 is reporting quantum core instability, announced the bay's artificial intelligence, its synthesized voice carrying professional calm that made emergency situations sound like routine maintenance issues. Estimated repair time using standard protocols is 6 hours 47 minutes. Marcus activated his diagnostic systems, immediately identifying the problem as cascade resonance in the core matrix that was creating power fluctuations dangerous enough to risk complete propulsion failure during critical evacuation operations. Not routine maintenance, he observed, analyzing the failure patterns. This looks like someone's been overriding safety protocols to push the shuttle beyond design specifications. The discovery was troubling enough to warrant investigation, though Marcus's experience with bureaucratic response times suggested that by the time official channels processed his concerns, several more shuttles might develop similar problems if the overrides were being applied systematically across the fleet. His access to emergency repair protocols included authorization to perform complex quantum core modifications that could restore stability while enhancing performance capabilities. Though such work typically required approval from both engineering command and diplomatic oversight, unless circumstances qualified as immediate threats to passenger safety. 6 hours is too long for a shuttle that might be needed for emergency evacuation during contested space operations, Marcus decided, activating the advanced repair protocols while documenting his decision in engineering logs that would either vindicate his judgment or provide evidence for disciplinary action if his assessment proved incorrect. The quantum core repair required precise recalibration of resonance frequencies, while balancing power distribution across multiple subsystems that had been designed by different manufacturers with incompatible interface standards. Marcus's expertise in both human and Velnari propulsion technology made him one of the few engineers capable of integrating systems that other specialists would declare fundamentally incompatible. Cascade resonance is stabilizing, Marcus announced to no one in particular, as the core's power output smoothed into optimal performance ranges. Though I'm seeing efficiency improvements that exceed manufacturer specifications by 15%. The enhancement wasn't intentional, but the integration of human reliability engineering with Valnari quantum resonance theory had created performance capabilities that neither species had achieved working independently. The shuttle would now be able to operate in emergency conditions that would disable conventional craft, while providing better passenger safety and comfort during routine operations. Marcus was completing the final diagnostic sequences when he became aware that he was no longer alone in the shuttle bay. A Valnari woman had approached his work area with the kind of quiet presence that suggested she'd been observing his repair work without wanting to interrupt critical procedures. "Impressive work," she said, her accented standard Galactic carrying the formal courtesy that marked educated refugees who had held positions of authority before displacement, forced them to depend on humanitarian assistance. "Your integration of the resonance frequencies shows sophisticated understanding of both species' engineering principles." Marcus looked up from his diagnostic displays to see a woman whose elegant bearing and sophisticated clothing suggested she held position within the refugee community, despite her presence in the technical areas, where passengers typically weren't allowed without specific authorization. "Thank you," Marcus replied, noting that her luminous markings were shifting through patterns that seemed to indicate thoughtful evaluation rather than simple emotional response. "Though I should mention that passengers aren't usually permitted in the engineering sections during repair operations. I have clearance for technical area access," she said, producing authorization credentials that identified her as Lyrelith Shandar, Refugee Assistance Coordinator with privileges that included monitoring shuttle maintenance and evacuation system readiness. "Your reputation for excellence in keeping evacuation systems operational has been noted by the communities you serve." Marcus studied her credentials while noting that her questions about the repair work demonstrated knowledge of quantum engineering that went considerably beyond administrative oversight of transportation logistics. "Ms. Shandar," he said, "I appreciate the recognition, though I'm curious about why a refugee coordinator would have technical expertise in propulsion system integration." "Because effective refugee assistance requires understanding whether the systems people depend on for survival are being maintained by someone who cares about their welfare, rather than just meeting minimum performance standards." Lyrelith replied with a smile that made her markings shift to patterns Marcus was learning to interpret as approval mixed with something deeper. "And because sometimes technical competence reveals character more clearly than administrative evaluations." As Marcus completed the shuttle core repair and prepared to test the enhanced systems that would provide improved safety and performance for future evacuation operations, he found himself wondering why a refugee assistance coordinator would possess engineering knowledge sophisticated enough to evaluate quantum resonance integration, and whether her presence during his repair work was routine oversight or something considerably more significant. He had no way of knowing that Lyrelith's evaluation of his work was based on criteria that extended far beyond technical competence into assessments of character and integrity that would soon transform his routine maintenance duties into responsibilities he'd never imagined accepting. Marcus's enhanced shuttle systems performed flawlessly during the diagnostic sequence, with quantum core efficiency readings that exceeded manufacturer specifications, while maintaining stability margins that would ensure passenger safety even during emergency operations in contested space, where technical failures could prove fatal. "The resonance integration is remarkable," Lyrelith observed, studying the diagnostic displays with obvious appreciation for both the technical achievement and the careful attention to safety protocols that had guided Marcus's work. "You've created performance capabilities that neither human nor Valnari engineers have achieved working independently." Integration was necessary to solve the cascade resonance problem, Marcus replied, though he was increasingly curious about why a refugee coordinator possessed sophisticated understanding of quantum engineering principles. The original design used incompatible interface standards that created instabilities when the systems were pushed beyond normal operational parameters. Pushed beyond normal parameters by someone who was overriding safety protocols. Marcus looked at Lyrillith directly, noting that her question demonstrated awareness of the technical analysis he documented in his repair logs. The failure patterns suggest systematic overrides across multiple shuttles in the fleet. Someone's been forcing these craft to operate beyond design specifications, probably to meet evacuation quotas that exceed safe transportation capacity, creating dangerous conditions for refugees whose lives depend on reliable evacuation systems, Lyrillith said, her markings shifting to patterns that Marcus was learning to recognize as controlled anger mixed with determination, while generating maintenance crises that could be used to justify reducing evacuation operations or demanding additional funding for replacement equipment. You're suggesting the overrides were deliberate sabotage, disguised as aggressive utilization. I'm suggesting that refugee assistance programs are vulnerable to exploitation by officials who profit more from crisis management than from successful resettlement operations. Lyrillith moved closer to examine the quantum core modifications, her technical knowledge evident in the questions she asked about resonance frequency optimization and power distribution algorithms. Your repair work demonstrates the kind of expertise and integrity that refugee communities need to protect them from systematic exploitation. Marcus completed his testing procedures while processing Lyrillith's comments about exploitation and crisis management, understanding that her evaluation of his work involved considerations that extended far beyond routine maintenance oversight. Ms. Shandar, he said, I appreciate your confidence in my technical abilities, though I'm beginning to suspect that your interest in shuttle maintenance involves more than refugee assistance coordination. You're correct, Lyrillith replied with the kind of careful honesty that suggested she was choosing to trust him with information that could create complications for both of them. I've been evaluating humanitarian operations throughout this sector, documenting systematic corruption that diverts refugee assistance for private profit, while creating conditions that justify increased military spending rather than successful civilian protection. Evaluating operations for what purpose? For prosecution of officials whose profitable operations require maintaining refugee crises rather than resolving them, Lyrillith said, activating a portable data device that displayed evidence Marcus was certain he wasn't supposed to see. Your technical expertise and personal integrity make you uniquely qualified to help expose corruption, while ensuring that evacuation systems serve refugee welfare rather than private interests. Marcus studied the evidence that painted a picture of systematic exploitation spanning both human and Velnari administrative hierarchies, seeing financial networks and coordination protocols that revealed how humanitarian assistance had been turned into profitable crisis management rather than effective refugee protection. This level of evidence collection requires legal authority that goes beyond refugee assistance coordination, Marcus observed, understanding that Lyrillith's access to classified information suggested she held position considerably more significant than her credentials indicated. It requires authority to investigate and prosecute corruption that threatens civilian populations during humanitarian emergencies, Lyrillith replied, her formal tone suggesting she was quoting from legal frameworks rather than explaining casual administrative procedures. Authority that I possess but cannot exercise safely without technical support from someone whose competence and character have been verified through direct observation, verified through observing my shuttle repair work. Verified through observing your dedication to ensuring that systems serve the people who depend on them rather than the officials who profit from their suffering. Lyrillith's markings shifted to patterns that spoke of hope mixed with barely controlled urgency. Marcus Torres, I need to ask something of you that will either save thousands of lives or put both of us in immediate danger from people who view dead witnesses as preferable to living proof of their crimes. Marcus looked at the woman whose technical knowledge and legal authority suggested she was considerably more than a refugee coordinator, while evidence of systematic corruption indicated that his routine maintenance work had been taking place within operations that were being deliberately sabotaged for private profit. What exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to accept responsibility for ensuring that evacuation systems serve refugee protection rather than crisis management, Lyrillith said, her voice carrying ceremonial weight that suggested the request involved legal frameworks rather than simple technical consultation. And I'm asking whether you're willing to be recognized as someone whose actions demonstrate worthiness to lead through service to others. Recognized by whom? By the authority that can grant you legal standing to investigate and prosecute the corruption, while ensuring that your technical expertise serves humanitarian purposes rather than private interests. Lyrillith's expression grew serious as she prepared to make an offer that would transform Marcus's routine engineering duties into something considerably more complex. Marcus Torres, are you willing to accept royal recognition of your service to refugee welfare? As Marcus processed the implications of Lyrillith's question, while emergency alarms began activating throughout the ship, indicating that the corruption network had realized their operations were being investigated and had decided to eliminate threats before evidence could be transmitted to oversight authorities. He realized that his simple shuttle repair had somehow evolved into a choice that would either advance humanitarian protection or make him a target for elimination by forces with resources and motivation to suppress inconvenient truths. Ms. Shandar, he said, understanding that his next words would determine whether his engineering expertise would continue serving routine maintenance or become instrumental in exposing systematic exploitation of vulnerable populations. I'm willing to accept whatever responsibility is necessary to ensure that the systems I maintain serve the people who need them most. Lyrillith's smile was radiant enough to activate the shuttle bay's emergency lighting systems. In that case, she said, approaching him with ceremonial formality that suggested she was about to invoke legal frameworks that would reshape both their lives, I have something very important to tell you. Lyrillith approached Marcus with the kind of ceremonial formality that transformed their technical conversation into something that felt like a formal declaration, her movements carrying the precise grace that Marcus was beginning to recognize as evidence of extensive training in diplomatic and legal protocols. Marcus Torres, she said, her voice shifting from conversational tone to formal pronouncement that carried across the shuttle bay with ceremonial authority. Your dedication to ensuring that evacuation systems serve refugee welfare rather than private profit demonstrates worthiness to lead through service to others. Marcus felt the atmosphere in the shuttle bay change as Lyrillith's words activated monitoring systems throughout the ship, creating the kind of diplomatic alerts that indicated something with significant legal implications was taking place in what should have been routine technical operations. Your integration of human and Velnari engineering principles to create safer and more effective transportation for vulnerable populations. Lyrillith continued, her formal language suggesting she was invoking ancient legal frameworks rather than offering personal opinions about his technical competence, proves that your expertise serves humanitarian purposes rather than merely meeting contractual obligations. The quantum core that Marcus had just repaired began resonating with harmonic frequencies that seemed to respond to Lyrillith's ceremonial words, while status displays throughout the shuttle bay showed system enhancements that exceeded normal operational parameters. By your actions, you have demonstrated character worthy of royal recognition, Lyrillith said, moving closer with movements that carried the weight of official ceremony. Marcus Torres, chief engineer of the vessel Starbridge, guardian of evacuation systems that protect the lives of thousands. She paused, meeting his eyes with an expression that combined gratitude with something deeper and more significant than appreciation for technical service. "This is my king," she whispered, the words spoken in formal Velnari but translated by the ship's systems into standard Galactic with ceremonial emphasis that made the pronouncement carry across all communication networks. The moment the words were complete, emergency protocols activated throughout Starbridge while quantum resonance patterns cascaded through every system connected to the ship's communication networks. The royal acknowledgement right had been formally invoked, granting Marcus provisional command authority over not just the shuttle fleet, but the entire network of evacuation corridors and emergency protocols that connected the humanitarian vessel to refugee assistance operations throughout the sector. "The royal acknowledgement right is now active," announced the ship's artificial intelligence with formal authority that transformed routine technical operations into diplomatic proceedings governed by ancient laws. Command authority has been transferred to recognized royal designation Marcus Torres, with all associated privileges and responsibilities under Velnari succession law. Marcus stared at Lyrillith as information cascaded through his consciousness. Access codes for evacuation systems he'd never known existed, communication channels that connected him to refugee assistance networks throughout human and Velnari space, and legal authority to investigate and prosecute officials whose corruption threatened civilian populations. "You're not a refugee coordinator," he said, understanding finally descending on him like a weight that threatened to crush his ability to process the implications of what had just occurred. "I am Princess Lyrillith Shandar, heir to the Velnari throne," she replied, her formal tone carrying the weight of royal authority while her expression showed relief at finally being able to reveal her true identity. "I've been working undercover to document systematic corruption in refugee assistance programs, while evaluating personnel who might possess the competence and integrity necessary to expose the exploitation." And the royal acknowledgement right, ancient law that recognizes individuals whose actions demonstrate worthiness to lead through service to others rather than through political appointment or inherited authority. Princess Lyrillith explained, activating displays that showed the scope of authority that had just been granted to Marcus. "By acknowledging you as worthy of royal recognition, I've bound our fates together while granting you legal standing to address the corruption that threatens refugee welfare." Marcus looked around the shuttle bay, where his routine repair work had just activated ancient laws that made him legally responsible for protecting refugee populations from systematic exploitation by officials who profited from crisis management rather than successful humanitarian assistance. "Your Highness," he said, processing implications that seemed to multiply faster than his ability to understand them. "What exactly does this royal acknowledgement require of me?" "It requires you to use the authority I've granted to ensure that evacuation systems serve refugee protection rather than private profit," Princess Lyrillith replied, her markings shifting to patterns that spoke of hope mixed with determination. "And it requires you to help me expose the corruption network before they eliminate both of us to protect their profitable operations." Emergency alarms began sounding throughout Starbridge as security systems detected unauthorized personnel moving through the ship with weapons and override codes that suggested the corruption conspiracy had realized their operations were being investigated and had decided to eliminate threats before evidence could be transmitted to oversight authorities. "They know about the royal acknowledgement," Princess Lyrillith observed, coordinating with defensive systems that were now responding to Marcus's royal authority. The right's activation has been detected by monitoring networks throughout both species' communication systems, creating immediate danger for both of us. Danger from whom? From human profiteers and Velnari traditionalists who cannot allow the royal acknowledgement to be formalized, because it would expose their coordination in exploiting refugee assistance programs, while providing you with legal standing to investigate and prosecute their operations. Princess Lyrillith activated emergency protocols that transformed the shuttle bay into a defensive position. We have until dawn to complete the formal acknowledgement ceremony, or the provisional authority expires, and we lose the protection that royal law provides. As armed figures began moving through Starbridge with equipment that suggested they were prepared for elimination rather than arrest, Marcus realized that his simple shuttle repair had become the catalyst for either exposing systematic corruption or ensuring that both he and Princess Lyrillith died together, while the evidence of exploitation remained suppressed. "Your Highness," he said, accepting responsibilities that his engineering training had never covered, "if you're willing to trust me with royal authority to protect refugee welfare, then I'm willing to accept whatever obligations that trust requires." Princess Lyrillith's smile was radiant enough to activate the shuttle bay's full lighting systems. "Marcus Torres," she said, his name carrying warmth that transcended formal protocol, "I think that dedication to service is exactly what the royal acknowledgement rite was designed to recognize and protect." As they prepared to either formalize the ancient bonding ritual while under attack or die together, while defending principles that neither human nor Velnari bureaucracies had been willing to protect through conventional oversight mechanisms, Marcus realized that his expertise in maintaining evacuation systems had evolved into responsibility for ensuring that those systems served the people who needed them most rather than the officials who profited from their suffering. The conspiracy's forces moved through Starbridge with military precision, armed with weapons that violated humanitarian vessel protocols, while carrying override codes that allowed them to bypass security systems designed to protect refugee populations from exactly this type of violence. "Multiple armed intrusions detected," announced the ship's artificial intelligence as emergency defensive protocols activated throughout the vessel. "Royal authority is now governing protective measures for the acknowledged heir and recognized consort." Marcus and Princess Lyrillith coordinated their defense from the shuttle bay, using his technical expertise and her royal authority to activate systems that had been designed to protect refugee populations during emergency evacuations, but could also serve as defensive measures against internal threats. The formal royal acknowledgement ceremony requires specific protocols that must be completed before dawn, Princess Lyrillith explained, as they prepared for the coordinated assault that would either eliminate them before the ancient laws could be fully activated or fail to prevent the exposure of systematic corruption that spanned both species' administrative hierarchies. "What kind of protocols?" Marcus asked, maintaining defensive systems while beginning the complex process of transmitting evidence to oversight authorities throughout human and Velnari space. "Mutual commitment to serving refugee welfare above personal interest, formal acceptance of shared authority over evacuation systems, and public declaration that your technical expertise will serve humanitarian purposes rather than private profit," Princess Lyrillith replied, coordinating with loyal crew members while monitoring the approaching threats. "Protocols that will make our bond permanent and legally unassailable, while granting you authority to investigate and prosecute corruption throughout refugee assistance operations." The first assault came from personnel wearing humanitarian organization uniforms, but carrying weapons that definitely weren't part of standard refugee assistance equipment. Marcus's emergency protocols had enhanced the shuttle bay's defensive capabilities, But the attacking forces were using override codes that suggested coordination with ship administration at levels that should have made such access impossible. They have inside help, Marcus observed, monitoring security feeds that showed the attackers' sophisticated knowledge of ship layout and defensive systems. Someone in command authority has been facilitating this operation. Someone whose profitable operations depend on maintaining refugee crises rather than resolving them, Princess Lyrillith replied, using royal communication channels to contact authorities from both species while coordinating defensive operations. The evidence we're transmitting includes documentation of corruption that reaches into the highest levels of both governmental hierarchies. The formal royal acknowledgement ceremony took place while under siege, with Marcus and Princess Lyrillith speaking ancient vows that acknowledged their mutual commitment to refugee welfare, while simultaneously broadcasting evidence of systematic exploitation to authorities who could act on the information faster than the conspirators could suppress it. I accept the authority to ensure that evacuation systems serve refugee protection rather than private profit, Marcus said, his words carrying across communication networks that reached oversight offices throughout both civilizations, while armed forces fought for control of the humanitarian vessel around them. I acknowledge Marcus Torres as worthy of royal recognition, granting him authority to investigate and prosecute corruption that threatens refugee welfare, Princess Lyrillith replied, her formal declaration triggering protective protocols that transformed their location into an impregnable sanctuary, while defensive systems throughout the ship responded to their combined authority. The moment their ceremony was complete, Starbridge's enhanced systems activated with capabilities that neither the attacking human nor Velnari forces had anticipated, while emergency communication arrays transmitted comprehensive evidence of the corruption network to governmental and judicial authorities across multiple star systems. "This is Admiral Santos of the Human Oversight Command," came a transmission from loyal forces responding to the evidence broadcasts. "We have confirmation of the corruption allegations and are moving to arrest personnel involved in the unauthorized assault on the humanitarian vessel Starbridge." "This is High Commander Velnara of the Royal Protection Corps," came a parallel response from Velnari authorities. "The royal acknowledgement is under our protection, and any interference with refugee assistance operations will be treated as treason against civilian populations." The trials that followed revealed the full scope of the corruption network that had been systematically exploiting refugee assistance programs for private gain, while the successful completion of the royal acknowledgement ceremony provided legal frameworks for ensuring that humanitarian technology served refugee welfare rather than crisis management that benefited private contractors. So, Marcus said 6 months later, reviewing reports from the Joint Oversight Commission, while serving in his new role as Royal Consort and Director of Technical Operations for the Integrated Refugee Assistance Programs. "We've exposed a criminal conspiracy, established new protection protocols for civilian populations, and proved that ancient royal recognition can create more effective oversight than conventional bureaucratic procedures." An impressive list of accomplishments for someone whose only intention was to repair a shuttle core to optimal performance standards, Princess Lyrillith agreed, watching their latest project, evacuation systems that integrated human reliability, engineering with Velnari quantum technology in ways that provided unprecedented safety and efficiency for refugee transportation. Marcus looked around their shared command center, where impossible partnerships between engineers and alien royalty were creating humanitarian innovations that served refugee protection rather than administrative convenience. "You know," he said, taking her hand while marveling at the way her luminous markings seemed to pulse in harmony with his heartbeat, "when I was working on that quantum core repair, the most complicated outcome I imagined was maybe having to explain to my supervisor why I'd exceeded authorized repair protocols. And instead I discovered that being recognized as worthy of royal acknowledgement creates stronger motivation for excellence than any amount of technical training. That ancient laws can provide better protection for vulnerable populations than modern bureaucratic oversight, and that the most important engineering problems are solved not just with better technology, but with better people who care about what the technology is used for. More complex than routine maintenance work, much more complex than anything they covered in engineering training, but exactly as complex as it needed to be. Marcus squeezed her hand gently, noting how her markings shifted to configurations that spoke of joy and deep partnership. Some recognition is worth accepting even when it transforms your understanding of what service actually means. Princess Lyrillith laughed, her joy creating harmonics that made their technical equipment resonate in sympathy. Even when that recognition involves binding your fate permanently to someone whose idea of romantic conversation includes reviewing evacuation protocols and refugee assistance efficiency reports. Especially then, though I should probably mention that your tendency to invoke ancient royal laws is keeping our legal staff constantly busy updating compliance procedures. That's what you get for being acknowledged by someone whose royal training emphasized service to others over personal advancement, Princess Lyrillith said, her luminous markings telling stories of partnership that would reshape humanitarian technology. Besides, royal acknowledgement seems to work well for us. As they continued their work developing evacuation systems that served refugee protection rather than private profit, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his understanding of his purpose had evolved. He'd started as someone who maintained transportation systems to meet technical specifications and contractual obligations, and somehow become someone who proved that engineering expertise served humanitarian purposes more effectively when combined with personal commitment to protecting the people who depended on those systems. The work was more complex now, involving legal frameworks that spanned star systems and royal authority that required constant attention to the difference between serving refugee welfare and serving the officials who administered refugee programs. But the fundamental mission remained the same: ensure that technology served the people who needed it most, and that technical excellence created opportunities for others rather than merely advancing personal career objectives. Marcus Torres had always believed that effective engineering required focusing on technical problems while maintaining professional distance from the political implications of the systems he maintained. He just never imagined that the most important recognition of his career would come from someone who proved that technical competence and personal integrity could be acknowledged through ancient laws that created stronger foundations for humanitarian service than all the modern administrative procedures that had previously governed relations between engineers and the populations who depended on their expertise. 3 months later, as Marcus watched the formal dedication of the Refugee Protection Accords with Princess Lyrillith presiding as co-signatory, while he served as technical director for the joint evacuation systems, he marveled at how a simple shuttle repair had become the foundation for proving that royal recognition could create more effective protection for vulnerable populations than the bureaucratic oversight that had been systematically exploited by those who profited from refugee suffering. Any regrets about whispering "this is my king" to a human engineer you'd been observing for all of 3 hours? Marcus asked as they prepared for the ceremony that would formalize the new protection protocols. "Only that I didn't do it sooner," Princess Lyrillith replied, her smile bright enough to power the evacuation systems they had designed together. "Though I should mention that your worthiness was evident from the moment you chose to enhance shuttle safety beyond minimum requirements rather than simply meeting contractual specifications." Sometimes the most important acknowledgement is recognition that someone cares more about serving others than about protecting themselves, Princess Lyrillith said, her luminous markings telling stories of love and service that would inspire humanitarian technology for generations. The royal acknowledgement right simply provided legal frameworks for partnership that was already waiting to be recognized. As they walked together toward the ceremony that would mark the beginning of a new era in refugee protection, Marcus realized that his engineering expertise had evolved into something that served not just individual technical problems, but the principle that humanitarian technology could protect vulnerable populations more effectively when operated by people whose personal commitment to service exceeded their concern for bureaucratic approval or career advancement. The most important system he'd ever maintained had been